I'm Lauren Kling, and this is 5 Things That Changed Your Life. Each episode, I sit down with a special guest and ask them to share 5 stories, events, or experiences that had an impact on their life, like a person who helped them decide a path to take, or a place that completely transformed the way they think. Perhaps it was inspiration from a family road trip or a childhood TV show that helped them to make the person they are today. This week's guest, Mary Forrest.
I want approval from other people, but I have a lot of difficulty accepting compliments. And even though I sort of have an empirical belief that I am good at things. I know I'm really good at the work I do, and I know that I'm intelligent. It's not like I think I don't have any capabilities, but I never really think I'm great. I really have difficulty accepting a compliment. And I also realize, I don't ask. I haven't had conversations with previous boyfriends where I'm like, how do I look? I just don't do that. Right. I actually only want to look in the mirror and think that I look acceptable to me. And that's the hardest part.
Mary is a writer, artist, improv and sketch performer, violinist, and professional selfie photographer. Additional interests include road trips, punctuation, Star Trek, superheroes, cartoons, noodles, and other Epicurean pursuits. As always, I am here with my producer, Alan. How's it going, Alan?
It's going good. I'm especially looking forward to this week's episode because we actually talked to someone that we both know.
We're both talking with our good friend and fellow improviser, Mary Forrest.
Yes, and so in case you're not aware of our backgrounds, Lauren and I met at National Comedy Theater in San Diego, and Mary was on the team at the time that we joined, and so that's how we all three connected.
Right, that was back in 2000 or
2001.
2001. You and I both tried out at the same time.
And we both got in. So we met Mary 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's a long time, and you've gotten to know Mary a bit, and I've gotten to know Mary a little bit. And knowing her, I've noticed that, she's lived like this big, full life. And then in talking with her, I realized I only know a portion of her life.
That's
a very small portion
right.
of it.
And that's where I find this podcast fascinating, and I think interviewing people in general. That's why I think I love being a host, because people that I think I know, this is a great excuse to get to know them better. And Mary, you're right, I totally agree, has so many facets about her that we don't know, and this episode we got to learn 5 new things about her that we didn't know. Number 1, learning to say yes and, where Mary, Alan, and Lauren all met. Number 2, what happened to Mary where it was the first time she realized she wasn't the best, and how it was the first on a series of steps to figuring out that no one likes a know-it-all. Number 3, how not moving to another country was a positive change in Mary's life. Number 4, how something happened to Mary while in a car, listening to Def Leppard's Hysteria on a cassette deck. And number 5, something that happened to Mary the first year she moved to Los Angeles and how that led her to starting her own company and meeting a number of important friends in the development of her career. Here we go. Here's the interview with Mary Forrest. Hey everybody, this is Lauren Kling. Welcome to 5 Things That Changed Your Life. My special guest is Mary Forrest. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi. Something that Alan and I and you all have in common is improv.
That's true.
So that's how we all met.
Yes, and that's how we all met.
Yes. At the same group.
Same group, NCT in San Diego.
Yep.
But I believe you were already on the team when Alan and I started. So when did you join the team?
So I auditioned in January of 2001, and the group that I joined with included, I don't know if you remember, Elvin Lubrin and Jesse Birschbach was part of that team. There were a group of really fun people, and it was when NCT was very small. I had actually seen them. I saw Gary and Ann and Matt and Tom, I think, all perform at UTC, at University Town Center, at this mall in San Diego.
Yeah.
I went on my lunch break. I'd seen an ad for it. Full disclosure, I'd just gone through a breakup, so I was looking through the newspaper all the time for stuff to do. I went to poetry readings. I did everything. And so I went and saw them perform, and they did did an improvised Shakespeare scene. And I remember thinking it was so funny, and they were so good. And I was like, oh, I really like them. And then later on, like a month or two later, I saw an ad posted that they were doing auditions. So I thought like, oh, well, I did improv in high school and college. And so, yeah, I'll go audition. And so I made the team, and I remember feeling extremely excited and fulfilled to be part of that. And I performed there for a number of years, even though like I think 6 or 7 months after I started performing there, I moved to LA. And so I just turned into the player that was almost never at rehearsals, but would come down on weekends to perform.
Right.
So.
Now, I didn't know this, that you did improv in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So were you a theater person, or are you a stand-up comedy person?
Theater, somewhat. I actually passed up theater in high school for debate. I was very like, high school for me, I was sort of convinced that I had to make all of these correct choices to line myself up for like the academic career and then future career that was going to make me, make my parents proud of me, which was mostly about making money. If you ask my mom, who's Chinese, by the way, that'll probably come into play at some point.
Okay.
But yeah, so I thought I was probably going to be pre-law or something in college. And so I auditioned for theater, but I did it for a little bit and then ended up doing debate for 3 years in high school instead. But I took like drama classes and stuff, and we did improv exercises. Like I remember when I started performing at NCT, that some of the exercises that we did felt very similar to warm-up exercises you do in all kinds of different performance classes. Right. So there's definitely a through line. And then I remember I auditioned for the improv team when I was at Cornell, but I was only at Cornell for 1 year, which is a subject for perhaps later in the podcast. But I auditioned for that team, and I think they were called the Whistling Shrimp. And I saw them perform and thought they were really great, and I auditioned for them. And I was called back to audition again with them, but then I didn't end up going back. So
got it. Was improv kind of a secret, fun hobby that was something your parents wouldn't know about, or did they mind if they were the ones that kind of wanted you to be successful financially? Was improv in the cards?
No, I think for my mom, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a writer. When I was a little kid, I'd always say I wanted to be a writer. And my mom would say, like, writers make no money. Be a lawyer. They write. That's her thinking was like, how can you take your passion for something creative and turn it into a secure future? Which I appreciate, but was, looking back on it, was perhaps not the best guidance, because I did really end up continuing to stray away from whatever the straight and narrow path was and do things that were more creative, either as part of my extracurricular life or part of work. And when I lived in San Diego, I used to perform. I did theater, I did musical theater, and I also played in numerous orchestras. Like I play the violin, and I would play in theater orchestras. Sometimes 180 nights a year, I would either be performing or rehearsing. I remember when I would do my taxes, I was like marking this stuff on my calendar, and it was a huge amount of time I would perform. And my mom would always be like, do you get paid for any of it? And it's like, no, I don't. I mean, or I'd get paid for a little bit here or a little bit there, but it was not like I was a union musician. And so for her, she didn't understand that there can be reward in doing something like that without getting paid.
Right. Do you feel like improv was an outlet for some kind of release?
No, I just so what comes easily to me is words, more so than movement. Like I'm very comfortable talking to people, and I'm very comfortable being humorous when it's verbal. In fact, when I was taking classes at IO West, I remember having a few teachers tell me that was definitely my strength, was like the verbal part of improv is definitely comes very easily to me, but the sort of movement and space work and object work were not something that didn't come naturally to me.
Right.
And so that was something I really wanted to work on too. That's what I admired when I saw Bob Dassey at IO West, like take an imaginary packet of cigarettes out of his pocket and take a cigarette out and, put it in his mouth and light it. And I could see every single detail of what he was doing. Right. He just did it so like fluidly and precisely. That's something that I really admired and always wished that I was better at.
Yeah. For me, I think the first time I admired object work was Matt McDonald, always taking out the candy bar to end a scene. And it was because he was a big guy. And so he always was happy to kind of explain, here's why I'm big, because I'm doing scene work of an imaginary
Real
candy
or not,
bar.
he was always eating.
But that was the first time I remember admiring that, going, wow.
I think that's what gastric bypass is, right? They just make you eat invisible food, right?
But the bills aren't invisible, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it's amazing to see somebody do object work where you visualize. That's like reading a book. Reading a book, you visualize the story and the scenery around you.
And then the thing with improv, though, is like being able to do that and have it be so obvious to everybody present, including the people in the scene with you. Like if you're creating some sort of an image that your teammates can see, and they see what it is and they know what it is and it's real to them, that's also magical. I mean, the worst is when you think that you've convinced everybody that you're in a kitchen, and then they drive in a car. It's like, okay, maybe I didn't build that properly.
Well, I was gonna say we came in the class after Mary.
Right, we started September of that year.
Well, that's when we joined, and we didn't ultimately perform until the following
right
year.
around the same time as Dorian and Chrissy, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
they were in our class,
I
too.
remember that audition. Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you think of Lauren when you first saw him?
So I actually because I wasn't coming to practices since I lived up in LA. I really heard about you guys, like everyone, like Gary and Tom, because I was very friendly with everybody on the team, and I would come down on the weekends and we would, go out to Brian's or whatever after, and we would talk. And I remember being told about you guys and being told who was like doing well and who wasn't doing well, or who they really had high hopes for or whatever. No, I mean, I honestly, I'm not specifically thinking that like they thought you guys were shit or whatever. I don't think that was the case. But I do remember that there was a certain perception that your influences were a little shaky, that there is definitely a little kind of like peak skill stand-up comic in you.
Oh, right. Okay.
So like
vaudeville, like old,
not vaudeville, but like
physical comedy.
Like a little, like
like Mort Saul, or can't remember the name. Yeah, keep going.
It's okay. We can chop
like
that down.
Jackie Mason, like
That's
not,
Jackie.
like not the Yiddish aspect of it, but just the sort of like the way that you go for laughs, which is why one of everybody's favorite moments of your like here's the thing is like there's a certain to use the Yiddish term, like there's a certain like schlemiel quality, whereas like not that you have it necessarily all the time, but where if a joke bombs, how you handle that says a lot about how you perform. Like Eddie Izzard, when a joke doesn't work well, he always takes out this invisible pad of paper, makes a note to himself, and everybody laughs at that. Like acknowledging that the joke didn't work is in and of itself a way of saving the
failing
joke.
big.
Yeah, but also recognizing that like it isn't about every single thing being a hit. It's about them wanting to hear what you're going to say next.
Right.
And so when we were doing one of those joke telling games and you told a joke and I guess it was crickets and you like ran off the stage, ran out of the theater, ran back into and we're all kind of standing on stage wondering what's happening. Like, did Lauren quit? Is he having a nervous breakdown? Like, is he crying outside? And then running back in and running all the way around the audience seating to come sit down in the front row and laugh really big as a member of the audience that was supporting your joke.
Right.
And it was great. And that in and of itself, like that was so funny and so brave and so different. It wasn't something anyone had ever done.
Or could ever do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like that's part of it, that there are certain jokes that there are certain styles and behaviors in comedy that you can't steal. There's some that you can, but there's definitely some where it's like, that was definitely Lauren Kling right there. I feel like the first time we ever performed on stage, this is back when there were still costumes, like when you and I were in a scene together.
Grab costumes out of the box.
Yeah, exactly. Filthy like wigs that had leaves in them and stuff. Like definitely.
Dust-ridden.
Yeah. Spider filled. Yeah. And I think you put on like a big multicolored clown wig.
Right.
And I think we were doing forward reverse. And I think you didn't realize we were in reverse or something like that. I just remember it being a scene where you weren't doing what you were supposed to do, but it was funny. It was funny because like you seemed lost, but it didn't seem like you were like if
I wasn't going for the joke, it was authentic.
Yeah, well, but I mean,
but you didn't give up.
But also, and I think part of improv, like one of the lessons I learned it took me a while, but the very first time that I performed at NCT, I remember doing a scene and feeling like I had made a mistake. And I was sitting over on the bench as they were moving on to the next scene, and all I was thinking about was how everyone in that audience had seen me make this mistake, and they must all think I'm terrible. And then you realize, like, what kind of ego do you have that you believe everyone in the audience is thinking about you and whether or not you did well? Like, you know, they forget what just happened and move on to the next funny thing. And realizing that, feeling that freedom to, like, not to want to not do well, but not to get completely in your head about when things didn't go the way that you wanted them to is really important, I think, in all, not just in comedy, but really in all performance. I would think if you're in a, you know, if you're in a professional presentation and you feel like something went awry or you made a joke that didn't land or something, you can't allow the entire experience to be about that.
Yeah, that makes me think of the war of art, where it's just you're fighting the demons in your brain who want you to not succeed.
Right.
Because you want to overthink things and make them perfect rather than just making them work. So I totally agree. But it's nice to find out something new about you in improv. So thank you, Mary Forrest, and Alan Ning, too. Yeah. Okay, here's something you mentioned. You say losing the national spelling bee. Mm-hmm. It's not the first time I realized I wasn't the best or the smartest in every room, but it was humbling and the first on a series of steps to figuring out that no one likes a know-it-all. Talk about that. What grade were you in?
I was in 8th grade, and I'd actually been trying to competing in various levels on the road to the National Spelling Bee since I was in, I think, 5th grade. My older sister and I were in the same school in Northern California when I was in 5th grade, so she and I competed, Sarah, and she won the school spelling bee, and she went on to the regionals, and then I think she got 5th place or something, and she didn't go on to the state finals or whatever. I remember the girl who won, her name was Amy Bevilacqua. Don't know why I remember that, but I completely remember it.
It's a speller's name for one thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I can spell it too. So then we moved to Guam, and Sarah and I were at 2 different schools. So she became the spelling champion from her school, and I was the spelling champion from my school, and we went to the island-wide competition, and she won, and I didn't. And so she got to go to Washington, D.C., so in many ways, the whole strategy for me was, I've got to get off this godforsaken island. Like, we were on, Guam is a tiny little island, and I didn't have a car, but you feel how little there is to see and do there. I loved it. I mean, I was a child, and I climbed trees and rode bikes and had a great time. But at the same time, I remember thinking, you know, its claim to fame at the time was that it had the world's largest McDonald's, which it no longer does. I think they built a bigger one in Russia or something. But at the time, that was the big thing, was to go to the McDonald's. So I spent my summers studying. Like, my mom bought me books of words. They weren't even words with definitions. They were just words, like words with pronunciation. So I wasn't actually broadening my vocabulary. I was just learning how to spell stuff. And I spent my whole summer, like, Sarah got to go back to Washington, D.C. with my mom. And they spent a week in D.C., but then they went and visited other relatives in the U.S. And Sarah got to go to Vegas, you know, like I think they had a very... You know, our Chinese family's experience of Vegas. I think they went to Circus and yeah, I don't know how great it was. Yeah, but
That was us.
yeah, but anyway, she got to do all these things I'd never done. So I'm just like spending every single day of the summer trying to cram all these words into my head.
Was this to beat Sarah, be as good as Sarah, or just to get off the island?
Well, if it hadn't been that I needed to beat her, and if she wasn't the only obstacle for me to get through, I still would have wanted to win. But it turned out that she was the person I had to beat. The next year we were at the same school, and it was down to us as the last 2 in the school, and we spent 5 days in the principal's office, going into the office for a couple of hours every day for him to try and eliminate one of us. And
Wow.
Then finally, Sarah won. And she got to go to the island-wide competition, and then she went to Washington, D.C. again, and I was left at home looking at my word lists, watching one channel of television that we had in Guam. And then, so by the time I was in 8th grade, Sarah was too old to compete. So it was definitely not, you know, the victory that I perhaps would have wanted. But but then I got to go, and I went to Washington, D.C., and they put your picture on a board. They sort of say some little fact about each person. And for me, it was that I was coming from the furthest away. I was the competitor in the National Spelling Bee that was, you know, had traveled the greatest distance. And I have to say, like, it was humiliating not winning. And I remember not feeling like a good sport about it. If there's video of it, I stomped off the stage. I was really not happy. And I went upstairs to the room, and my sister, Sarah, had perhaps not accurately told me that if you watch that, like this, they had like those pay-per-view boxes on top of the TV at the Capitol Hilton. And there was like a rated R movie. I think it was Hot Dog with Shannon Tweed, which is like about skiing. And I was not allowed to see rated R movies. But like Sarah would say, if you just watch like a minute at a time, like it doesn't start billing you until you've watched 2 minutes. So like just watch 2 minutes and then turn it off, and then you can turn it back on again. I have no idea whether that's true, but I did watch almost all of that movie. And I don't remember feeling like that was any great shakes. It was just like, fuck all this. I'm going to see boobs, and I did. But then later on, what was so great was like, I was ashamed and I was embarrassed and I felt like I'd let my parents down. But then we all went and hung out together. All the competitors hung out together in this ballroom. We had, food and whatever. I mean, we were like 12 and, 10 to 12 years old. We were very young kids.
Right.
And one of the kids from that year, John Stevens, is actually actually John Stewart. There's two. There's John Stevens and John Stewart. I was good friends with both of them. But anyway, I continue to be friends with them to this day, which is great. Although we've never seen each other since that year.
Right.
But so we were all talking, and we're all like signing each other's autograph books and like talking about what word we got out on. And actually all the camaraderie was amongst the losers. Nobody was hanging out with Daniel Greenblatt, who won that year, on the word luge, the 4-letter word luge. But everybody, like everybody else from the second place person down, we all had this great time sharing our experience of not having won, which was actually so much more, I think, important than being the kid to take home the trophy and the extra set of Encyclopedia Britannica.
As somebody who struggled to win and kept, as you say, kept losing and being stuck in...
I don't know if that's the word I used. Thanks, Lauren.
Not winning?
I kept not winning, yes.
You kept
Not reaching your potential.
But
kept disappointing my ancestors? Is that what you were trying to say?
Honoring your ancestors.
Yes. But, you describe Guam, and the idea that Guam is this small little place that you kept getting stuck in. You were trying to get away. And once you got away, that's when you discovered that the camaraderie, it wasn't about winning that gets you off of that island.
I mean, it would have been great to win.
Right.
But I also feel like if I had, none of those kids would have wanted to talk to me. There's a certain I think we all wanted to be that kid. And he actually, in my recollection, he wasn't very sociable. I don't know if it was because he was a jerk. I just know that I don't remember him talking to very many people. He might have been nervous, whatever. But what's really interesting about that time in my life was that's right before I'm entering high school. And one of the things that I used to struggle with is when you have the reputation of being the smartest kid in the class, which I always had the reputation of being. In a way, it was strategic because I was a Navy brat and we were moving around a lot. And I'd often find myself in a new school where if you establish really early on that you are the smartest kid in the class, the teachers sort of subliminally recognize that you're the smartest kid in the class, and they expect great work from you. So even when you turn in work that isn't great, they're like, oh, it's Mary's paper, A. And I don't know that that's fair, but I do know that I'll admit that when I was in high school, I wrote some papers for friends of mine who were afraid that they were going to fail. And I wrote these papers to my standard, but perhaps not with the same floral vocabulary that I would have used for myself.
Right.
And I thought I wrote better papers for them than I had for myself, and they got C pluses, which was good for them.
Right.
That was good for them because they were expecting an F. And I thought, see, that's the whole point.
Because you didn't have the word luge in any of them.
But it's like that a teacher actually, especially with grading that's subjective, about writing or about,
of course,
term papers and things. Teachers really...
Yeah. How was your relationship with Sarah after that experience?
Well, our whole life, we're less than 2 years apart. I skipped a grade when I skipped first grade. And at the time, they actually wanted to skip me a few grades because I guess my reading level was very high. I guess. Sorry. Yeah, but my parents were like, okay, but she can only skip one grade. She can't advance past her sister. They were worried about it affecting Sarah's self-esteem, and I think that's fair. And frankly, I would not have been a good like Doogie Howser, like that maturity thing that people like as a kid you don't really think about it. But I was barely mature enough to be in second grade when I skipped first grade. I remember not really. Like, you just suddenly feel out of place. Like, I skipped a couple of months into the year, so all of a sudden I'm in different classes.
Well, let me rephrase that. Well, I'm in specifically about the spelling bee and the competitiveness. Did anything change in you looking back between your relationship with Sarah once you discovered what it was like to get off the island?
I don't think so. I feel like she and I are still extremely competitive, and I think that I excelled in academic stuff all the time, and I don't want to offend her by saying it, but I doubt she'll listen to this. So, but I mean, I did better than she did in school all the time after that, and so it was never like. And I didn't do it to spite her. In fact, I did everything I could to help her in school too. I was always trying to get closer to my sister. I think I always felt alienated from her. I always felt like she didn't like me or didn't want me around because I was the younger kid that kind of came in and stole her thunder. That's what happens when you're a couple years younger.
But it sounds like something that your parents really instill in you kids.
You mean the competition?
The competitiveness.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, yes, there's the sibling rivalry, but I haven't experienced that in nearly as much as it sounds like.
No, I mean, my younger sister, my parents were visiting a couple of days ago. They spent a few days with me. I took my dad to the opera. It was great. And my little sister called me, and like the running joke, like she called me to say, oh, Mom was driving and she asked me to call you and let you know that they're on the road. She wanted you to know, she wanted her favorite daughter to call and tell you that they're on their way. And then when my parents came, I was just like, it's all right. I don't mind that Beulah says that. We all know I'm the favorite daughter. I mean, like that's the joke in our family. So, but we all believe it's true of us.
Right. It's not, you're old enough to joke about it, but it does sound like there's still that underlying.
Sure. Well, that's a very Chinese thing. I have to say, like, my dad is a Jew from Philadelphia who became a Christian the year that I was born, or right before I was born. So I was raised in a Christian house, and my dad is a white guy. But my mom really set a lot of the standards, and I don't remember my dad ever expressing approval or disapproval about a grade or about, an extracurricular choice. Like, he was there and he was very supportive, but I don't remember him ever feeling like it was his job to tell us what to do, whereas my mom felt it was always her job to tell us what to do. And
that was her upbringing.
Yeah. I think that Chinese moms live vicariously through their kids. Even if they have very full lives, they still believe that their kids are kind of, it's like you like broke off of her, like you were a little bulb on her skin that broke off and turned into a human being. So like you're her. And if you bring dishonor to her by not living up to your potential, like it's as if she failed.
Do Chinese moms ever let their children go emotionally or figuratively? I mean,
my mom's constantly threatening to disown me, if that's what you mean. But no, I mean, she says it very softly. She'll say like, well, I guess maybe you should just go live your life. And I'll be like, but I am living my life. Like, what is this?
Right.
But she says
You
that a lot.
don't need me.
Exactly.
Yeah, ours was a little different because my parents were like geniuses and my brother was very smart.
What are you trying to say about my mom?
Well,
Jesus
I'm
Christ,
saying about me.
Alan.
I'm saying about me is like, I knew there's no way I was going to be as smart as any of them. So I just kind of held to my content little mediocre
But did
life.
you feel that? Did you feel like they were disappointed in you?
No, and that was...
Then they're not Chinese. I don't believe you. That can't be true.
Well, they were definitely from the culture. I mean, like their parents were the immigrant, the hard worker.
I see. So
And
my
then-
mother
and
was
their-
born in Taiwan.
Yeah.
I was actually born in Taiwan too, but my mom was born and raised in Taiwan.
Yeah.
And then, so I'm actually the next generation.
got it. So one of you is more Chinese-ier than the other.
Yes,
Great.
yes.
Yeah, we definitely had...
He's genetically more Chinese than I am,
Right.
but I obviously suffered more. So
Yeah, culturally, you are much more Chinese than I am.
So you had talked about moving around. You were a Navy
brat.
A Navy
yeah.
brat. Mm-hmm. So you moved to Guam. Mm-hmm. You could have moved to Italy, which I'm interested. One of the things you said is not moving to Italy when my parents moved there when I was 20. So that's the time where you decide if you're going to...
Right. So we actually lived in Italy right after I was born for 3.5 years or so. Like I spent my early childhood there. But we were living in San Diego, and I was I was working and going to community college because I had left Cornell at this point, and I was trying to get enough credits to transfer into a University of California. my dad had an offer to go back to Naples, where he had been stationed when I was a kid, and they were going to move there. And because if you're under 23, I think if you're between 18 and 23, if you're a full-time student, you can still be a dependent in the military. So I could have gone or not even a full-time, I think you have to be a half-time student, but I could have gone and lived with them. And instead, I had a boyfriend that my parents didn't like, with good reason. And I had a not very well-paying job, but it was like located near the community college, and I felt like I had things figured out. And I had moved out into an apartment of my own, and my first apartment. And I thought at the time, like, well, why would I move to Italy? Like, my life is going in the direction it's going to go. I'm going to go to a University of California. If I go to Italy, then I'll be able to take classes at the University of Maryland campus that they have there, or whatever. I'll probably get a job at the Navy Exchange. Looking back on it, though, it could have been a really, really important bonding time for me and my family. Like, my younger sister was still in middle school and then high school at the time. And I could have been there with them. And also, like, I really didn't do a lot of the stuff when I lived in San Diego that I thought I was going to do. I really did have a terrible relationship with a guy that I stayed in the relationship with for far too long, like 5 years. And I feel like I made a lot of decisions that just compromised to kind of keep my life at the pace that it was, instead of being ambitious or thinking about real possibilities. Like, I could have even gone away to... I had applied to UC Berkeley, and so by the time I had enough credits to transfer as a junior, I could have gone to UC Berkeley, and I didn't, because I was like, yeah, but my boyfriend is here, and I made all of these decisions that I look back on and think, what a boob. Like, just not smart.
So it's interesting, though, that one of the 5 things you wrote down that changed your life was not moving to Italy, and it sounds like you still have regrets about the decisions that were a result of not.
Right. Well,
moving.
So I do think, like, at least the portrait I have in my head of how things could have been are better than what happened during that time. But at the same time, my independence and being in the United States while my parents and my younger sister were living overseas, in a time where, like, they didn't have a phone for the first 6 months that they lived there. Like, the infrastructure in Italy, like, you're lucky if the garbage guy comes by, unless you're giving him a carton of cigarettes every week. Like,
and their McDonald's is probably nowhere near as big as
They had a Wendy's.
as Guam's. Okay.
It was the world's biggest.
The world's biggest
exactly.
before Guam took over
exactly.
the... Yeah.
So your parents and family were basically inaccessible at this point.
Yeah, and, like, we would fax, once they got a phone line, because of the cost of calling, like, we would fax each other, it was like...
cheaper than...
Yeah. And so I just remember that, I would send them packages and things, but it wasn't like I had ready access to them.
Right.
But I do think, like, that independence in some ways was very good for me. And during that time, that's when my whole music life and performance life really blossomed. I started, so I auditioned for some plays and I performed in some plays, and then I started playing with these orchestras, and I just had this very, very full creative life that I think if I had, finished college on the pace that I thought I was going to, and ended up either a scientist or a lawyer or whatever it was I was going to end up doing. I remember some of my friends who went on to graduate from Cornell, a good friend of mine, Jason, who was a violist,
right,
was really jealous because he'd pretty much put his instrument away because he became an engineer, and he didn't have time to have that part of his life blossom. Whereas for me, I mean, I had a job, but it wasn't a job that was all consuming. It was basically a 9-to-5 job. I worked at a biotech company for a number of years, and I enjoyed working there, and I had nice people that I worked with, and they didn't have a problem with me leaving at 6 p.m. to go and play in orchestras. So my life felt very balanced in that way. And I don't think I would have ever had that. I bet I would never have picked up my violin again after high school. So it's great that that's something that I do treasure and would not have stumbled into, I think.
Thank you for sharing that, because it's interesting seeing somebody say that something they didn't do was a significant change, but you really made it make sense. It was kind of, you forced yourself to be independent with your family moving away, and you realized you could be successful in your own way.
Also, I think if my mom had been right there next to me, she would have been pushing me to not do things that were creatively satisfying, which is what she'd always done. So I just had the freedom, to make those choices without feeling her disapproval, which was never intended to harm me, but it was very active. I mean, there were moments that were sort of I told you so moments for her. Like I was playing in an orchestra pit. We were playing Guys and Dolls, and it's an outdoor theater up on Mount Helix, and there's mosquitoes and things. So we all burn these citronella candles around the stands. And I had hair at that time long enough to sit on. I had very long hair, and my hair caught fire. Literally during the manhole dance in Guys and Dolls, I was like, my standmate said to me, she was like, "Oh, your hair!" And I was like, I realized, oh, my hair's on fire, and I'm going like patting it out. The smell was for like 2 weeks, the whole run of the show. I just remember you could see like bits of burned hair on the ground and like a bunch of hair burned off. It wasn't that bad. It burned underneath, and I wasn't hurt at all. It was embarrassing.
Were there other violinists that covered you while you were putting out your hair?
I patted my. I mean, yeah, we had it. There were like 8 people in the section, or 6 people in the section. So yeah,
and the show went on.
Yeah, and the people who were right in the front row saw it, but nobody else saw it. And I remember going home that night and calling my parents, and I was just like, I told my mom that this had happened, and she it took her 30 seconds to stop laughing before she actually asked me if I was okay. Oh, no, so that's a frequent occurrence.
I guess that's a different kind of parenting. I want to say a different kind of love, but
what this time?
Yeah. And then it's usually like, I told you shouldn't have done that. I told you shouldn't have been in the orchestra,
Because obviously your hair would catch on fire.
Exactly. I could foresee that. I could foresee it.
Yeah. All right.
Sorry. I know. This isn't the legacy my mother maybe would have wanted. So.
No. It's as I've been spending the last few years trying to discover myself and finally realizing what everybody else saw in me, because that's been difficult. Is people would say I'm funny, but I never believed it. I never believed in myself and never knew what that meant. Were people laughing at me, with me? So it's only the last couple of years I've really appreciated, like, okay, I look different, I sound different, but I have talent. So let's use that and have fun and not worry about it. That's letting go of things from my childhood.
Yeah.
And that's been such a weight off my shoulder. So hearing you talk about this weight from your childhood and that you carry some of it still.
Oh, yeah. And I've actually, to respond to what you're saying about people telling you that you have talent, like, for me, that doesn't even matter. Like, I want approval from other people, but I have a lot of difficulty accepting compliments. And even though I sort of have an empirical belief that I am good at things. I know I'm really good at the work I do, and I know that I'm intelligent. It's not like I think I don't have any capabilities, but I never really think I'm great. And, this is a thing that men struggle with this with women a lot, where like they don't understand, like if you tell a woman that you think she looks nice and she doesn't think she looks nice, you think that she's just doing it so that you'll give her another compliment, like it's not that at all. For me, I really have difficulty accepting a compliment. And I also realize, like, I don't ask. Like, I haven't had conversations with previous boyfriends where I'm like, how do I look? Like, I just don't do that. I actually only want to look in the mirror and think that I look acceptable to me. And that's the hardest part. That's why sometimes I have to change 15 times, because I'm like, nope, not that. Nope, can't get away with that. You're going to be thinking about how your legs look in that all day. Like it's all me. The things that are like you could argue that those voices were planted by my mom, but the voice that I'm hearing is not my mother saying you don't look good. It's me going, I know I don't look good. And it's me like thinking that, well, but I see other people and I have initially critical thoughts of how they look, because this is like how I was raised. My mom would watch the Miss America pageant, and every single person that walked out on the stage, she was like, oh, she looks like a maid. Oh, turnip legs. Look at that face. Nobody was beautiful except like with the Miss Universe pageant, always Miss Venezuela. She was always very pretty, apparently. But there were very, very few women that my mom would go, oh, she looks nice. So we were just trained to be really critical, to look for the thing that looked worse. And so, like, if I see someone, a friend even, like, I won't ever say to them, like, oh, I notice you've put on weight or whatever. Like, I'm not going to say that, but I know I'm thinking it.
Right.
So I know when they say to me, you look great, I'm thinking, no, I don't. I know what you're thinking. I don't actually know if those things are true for people. I just know how it works in my brain, and it's very hard for me to believe that it doesn't work that way for other people.
It's interesting how, there's this idea of perfection, and for a lot of people, they are accepting that I can never be perfect. I can just be the best I am, versus other people, I can never be perfect, and therefore I will never be
Right.
be a good person or
Well,
reach my full potential.
I think of that scene in Lost in America where, the 22, I can get it all back. I can get it all back, right? Like this feeling that like, is that my phone? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
I doubt anyone can hear it.
But that feeling that if you keep pushing, maybe it'll all turn around. Mm-hmm. And as I've gotten older, like I kind of go, yeah, I'm never going to get it all back. It's not like at some point I'm going to be 25 again and I can just like take that version of me and try something different. You really do have to think of life being linear. Mm-hmm. I think even the sort of human nature of thinking of regret. I mean, like regret is only useful if you learn something that affects what you do in the future. It is in no way useful to dwell on things that you've done wrong in the past. It just because you can't do anything about it.
And it's very freeing to realize that you're enough now, and all of those things in the past help shape you and alter your course in some way. That's why this podcast series is so fascinating, because I would OD on podcasts that I've mentioned in other episodes, like Nerdist, where I hear Chris Hardwick or somebody else talk to an actor or an artist about their struggles, because I wanted to feel like there was somebody else who struggled like me. And it got to the point where everybody's story was different. I never heard the same story. And it finally clicked in me that my story cannot be the same. Right. So I can't look at somebody and say like, I'm going to just do what they did, because
there's no path to success that you can walk down or walk down or follow.
I think that's really natural, though. I think that when you're struggling, like I remember going through a really painful breakup, and you just want to find a story, hear someone talk about it, a friend that has gone through something similar, just to feel like you're not alone in it. Not because you think they necessarily have the answers, but this is why when you have a friend who's just gone through a recent breakup, you're just like, oh, great. Like, that's all we're going to get to hear about. They're going to sit and talk about how much they're hurting over this. And I lacked that empathy until I went through it. Like, I had friends who would talk to me about it, and I would always sort of be like, oh, well, you'll get over it, whatever. Right. I'd never really gone through this, like, really, really devastating heartbreak. And once I had, all of a sudden I was like, oh, I get it now. And I also know, like, when people come to me now when they're going through a loss, I completely understand how much the walls seem to have closed in, and all you can think about is that loss, and how you've made your world the absence of this person.
Right.
And I think like it's interesting because I know plenty of people who've never experienced that, and it isn't as if the story is everyone goes through it. There's plenty of people who don't. There's people who break up but don't necessarily become, a prisoner of the breakup or a prisoner of the abandonment or the loss or the betrayal or whatever it is. And then there are other people who just never ever get past it. Which, I mean, that's a rough choice when you have that.
Do you think you're enough?
No. I mean, like, I think that my inadequacy is my fuel. The fact that I haven't done everything or accomplished everything or become as good at everything, like, that's what drives me.
Are you looking for perfection, or you're just looking, or not that much?
But see, the thing to me is, like, I guess perfection sounds like an end point.
Right.
And I don't believe there is going to be one, because even if I were to, let's say I did P90X or something, and let's say I resolve all of my body issues, as if that could happen. But let's say I did.
You look great, by the way, Mary Forrest.
Thanks. Don't
love the hair.
Yeah. No, but so, like, let's say I did that.
Right.
I would still. The point is, like, that thinking. The problem is when you get to the point where you've achieved that body, how do you maintain it if you don't actually believe that it's not an end point? You have to completely change how you live in order to sustain anything, and that's a big commitment, which I think a lot of people have trouble making. And for me, that's the same, which is why I mean, when there's something that I can do and be good at, I'm going to gravitate towards that. But recognizing that there are things I still haven't done that I want to do, like, that's not going to ever change. I feel like I've missed many, many, many chances to be great. So in a way, that informs a lot of what I do too.
But you think it's too late?
No. Well, so here's the thing that I think is too late. Because I was like a kid who was always the smartest, and I was often the youngest. There was a point in my life where I remember it finally occurring to me when I was like maybe 25 that I'm never going to be the youngest person to do anything. And my friend Howard actually sent me some article. I think it was in the New York Times, but it was about the paralyzing negative effect of child prodigies, because in a way, after you leave your childhood, you lose your specialness. You lose the opportunity to be superlative. And it's like, if all you've been working for is to have people think that's really great for an 11-year-old, as opposed to that's really great. Once that defining piece of it is gone, you don't know what you're working for. And I definitely felt that. I felt like, but I wanted to be the youngest person to do that. Like, I actually was the youngest person to do a lot of things in my life. But I don't even know why that has value today. I don't know why it would matter. But I do remember going through a period where I thought that I didn't know what to do.
Well, just so you know, you're the youngest Chinese person to ever be on this podcast by 2 months.
Oh, fantastic.
Congratulations.
If it wasn't me.
Here's a heck of a job brownie
Great.
award for you.
Too much sugar.
On that note, we'll continue. All right, this is something really interesting. One of the things I love about you is your way with words. And the way you describe this one is intriguing.
Okay.
So you say, losing my virginity.
Yes.
I lost my virginity in a car with Def Leppard's Hysteria playing on the tape deck. And that was the beginning of a series of rejections and relationship choices that did not lead to, shall we say, bliss.
It's true. It's true.
So,
Is Hysteria? I'm not a big Def Leppard aficionado, but that's their big one, or
that was the album that came out with Armageddon on it, and Pour Some Sugar on Me. You might remember that song. So that was that album.
So what was the car that this cassette player was in? Do you remember?
It was I believe it was I think it was like a Honda CRX. Yeah,
that is not the car.
That's a small car.
That is not the car I was thinking. I was thinking like a Ford a GTO.
No.
Or
Well,
something.
this was on the Navy base in Japan.
Okay.
It's almost impossible to lose your virginity in a car.
In a CRX?
In a CRX? I would think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't do it in the back seat, if that's what you mean.
Okay. Well, please give us the details.
Okay.
Yeah, so this was a boy that was a grade ahead of me and was like a friend, because I was in a lot of classes with him, and he was a friend of my sister's, and he was always very flirtatious, and like he was one of those people where I now know this is like a monstrous behavioral trait, but he's one of these people where in conversation with everyone in the room, he's very appropriate with you, but in a moment, if it's just the two of you and nobody else can hear, all of a sudden he says incredibly inappropriate things to you, sexual things to you. And to me, that was just titillating. It was like I would be shocked and embarrassed and uncomfortable. And what ended up happening was that the adrenaline of feeling shocked and embarrassed and uncomfortable gets programmed into your brain as attraction. Like, I think a lot of us misread cues of a crush, when in reality, it's your brain telling you that person is bad news. You should be scared of them. It's like your warning signals are going on. When you feel someone makes you feel uncomfortable, it's like the, last decade's discussion of the neg, right? When guys deliberately try and make a girl feel uncomfortable by either playfully insulting her or criticizing her, like all of a sudden you're thinking, wait, what's wrong with me? And that nervousness can be misinterpreted as chemistry. Like you're like, why am I all flush and why is my heart pounding? It's like, it's not because you like the guy, it's because he's a dick, But that was what was going on with me. And I was, I was like 15, 16 years old. I was like 14, 15 when I first met him. And so he flirted with me a lot, and he had gone away to college and came back for the winter break. And he and I had written to each other while he was away, and I definitely had a crush on him, and had like lost certain earlier levels of virginity, not the big one, but they were all
Bases,
during but they were like playing strip poker and playing, like they were never, it wasn't some romantic thing. It was like you lost, now you got to blow me, that kind of thing. So sorry, Mom and Dad, if you're listening. But anyway.
So your mom and dad would listen to this, but not Sarah.
No. Well, Sarah. I don't think any of them will, frankly. But so anyway, so this was like that winter, and he and I went for a drive. I don't remember exactly why we went out. It was right after the New Year, or right before the New Year, sometime in that range. And like we ended up doing it.
Not in the car.
In the car.
Oh, in the car. In the
Yeah,
CRX.
you
Okay.
put the seat back.
Got it.
Yeah. You just like recline and you've got enough space
It's
for,
basically a
yeah.
bed.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. So it wasn't great, but, and it wasn't like I didn't think necessarily that it was supposed to be great. It was just one of those things where I think on some level I was ready to be done with it, but I also really liked him.
It was a rite of passage in a way.
Yeah, and we were not dating. Like, this is another thing I did wrong, which I think has a lot to do with my mom, like, never really training me of what my expectations should be of boys. In her mind, you should not date. Like, in high school, you're too young, don't have a boyfriend. And as a result, I had no coaching at all in, like, saying, well, a boy who does that is not a good boy. You know, go out with a boy who does this. A boy should make you feel like this or should make you
Right.
feel... And we never had those talks. It was just, don't be with boys. So there's a rebellious part of you that kind of says, well, I'm going to be with boys. And also, I'm really curious about sex, and we're not talking about it. I don't know. And so the fact that this guy seems interested in having sex with me makes me feel like maybe that means I'm special, instead of realizing, no, that means that guy wants to take advantage of you. And so I lost my virginity that night. And the very next day, he took another girl's virginity, and she became his girlfriend, like, to the point where, like, they were leaving each other personal notes in the newspaper and stuff. Like, everyone knew that they were together. No one ever knew that anything had happened between him and me, which was really, like, I think formative. For me, it felt like, oh, I'm that secret girl that you're willing to be inappropriate with when no one's looking, but you don't want anyone to know you're with me. And I don't know why I found that acceptable, because I didn't extricate him from my life for another couple of years. When I came back to San Diego, I still socialized with him and fooled around with him a few times. And it was never a relationship. We were never boyfriend and girlfriend. So, like, one of my very first relationships was not a relationship. And that was, I think, important. I don't have one of those stories of, like, I had a high school boyfriend and we're holding hands in the hallway and we've been dating for 6 months, but we haven't kissed yet. Like, I knew people like that where they're just discovering each other in an innocent way. And I never had that.
So the subsequent encounters, were those adrenaline boosters?
Well, subsequent encounters, I think I always assumed you had to move to sex very quickly. Like, either because that was the only thing that was going to prove to you that they liked you or whatever. Like, I feel like for the most part, like, I was kind of like, if we didn't have sex on the first date, I would assume we don't like each other. You know, and I didn't date a lot, so don't get any ideas. It was just like, for me, what would happen is I would go out with a guy and I would sleep with him that first night and end up with him for 5 years. You know, it was like, or it would be, you know, I would only be able to date people that I worked with or people that I knew from theater. I still don't really know how to date regular people out in the world. It's a mystery to me. I don't, you know, the apps are not, I don't know why guys think that the only thing women are interested in is them shirtless on a sailboat. Like, I don't even like sailing. So there's nothing about that photo that says we belong together.
The thing now, because a friend of my wife and I is single, and she's got the apps, and all of the guys are holding up their little puppy dog.
I've
Like,
seen some of
that's
that.
the thing.
I've also seen them with a lot of kids, and then there'll be like a note. They'll be like, these are my nieces and nephews. And I'm like, but you get to pick the photo. So if you think it's going to be confusing, how about don't pick that one? Plus, I'm beginning to think that washboard abs are like a sign of, I think they should be in the DMS. I think it actually is a disorder. People who have washboard abs, there's something going on there.
What would be your, I don't want to say perfect, what would be your favorite picture that a guy could post where you're like, I want to know more?
I guess the thing is, like, any picture that tells me something about you in a way runs the risk of my feeling that it's forced. Like, if it's you with your glasses on, holding up a copy of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, like, I like that you're reading that book, but I don't believe this photo. You know, like, who did you ask to take that picture of you? You know?
So what do you think you would find the most charming? Or have you ever seen one that was charming, whether
A
or not...
Star Trek uniform.
No. See, so I do think, like, what ends up happening is I look for the least objectionable things. Like, I definitely... And the other thing is, like, I don't generally want to swipe right on a guy who's super, super hot. I think my self-esteem is such that my belief is like, well, why is that guy going to want to go out with me?
Well, again, so I'm asking you, is there one picture you could say it was the most charming? Like, there was something about it, doesn't have to have been the hottest guy, but he seemed true to himself that you
Yeah, I mean,
appreciated?
like, I think if a guy, if a photo's being, a candid photo or a posed photo, even in a situation where a guy is just, like, enjoying himself, whether it's, like, with drinks or food or friends or whatever, like, photos that look like, normal
Life.
photos. Yeah, and I feel like, girls can get away with this a little bit more because I have a lifetime of selfies, as you may know. Like, I've been an avid selfie-tographer for long before social media was a thing. But I think, like, the pictures I take of myself, I'm a girl, so maybe this is in some way a form of sexism, but when I see a guy take some come hither photo of himself, like sort of glaring at the camera with, like, his shirt coming off his shoulder, that's too much for me. That's, I feel like I don't want a guy to look overtly sexual in a photo either.
Right.
Like, I do think there's a certain part of me that thinks, like, well, let's meet on alt.com if that's what you want. But that's, like, for dating. When I first moved to LA, I was doing online dating. This is before the apps. It was like on websites. And I did this one that was on salon.com. And it was salon.com and nerve.com. It's called Spring Street Networks. And it eventually moved on to The Onion and a bunch of different websites. And so, like, you would see guys that were there who had joined through nerve.com. And they were like, their pictures were like, here's my pierced penis. Like, because Nerve is like this very sexual sort of, like, alt magazine. And then I joined from salon.com because I was like, yay, politics, liberals,
Pierce penises.
Yeah, exactly. And so I didn't know. I joined on salon.com. I didn't even realize that it was on other sites. So I'm assuming the people that I'm, seeing are there for the same reason as me.
Right.
And then little by little, it starts, proliferating across the internet. And people are like, well, I saw you on thestranger.com or I saw you on theonion.com. And I was like, when was I on the Onion? And then I realized, oh, it's because I was, the featured profile of the day or whatever.
Right.
And I think, like, in those cases, I was willing to go out with just about anybody because I just wanted to refocus. And I wanted to meet new people. And I tried not to be, like, for me, I was just like, I don't really want to go out with someone who's tremendously shorter than I am. I don't mind them not being super tall, but I didn't want to go out with guys who are like 5'2", because I'm 5'7". So not because I think that it honestly, it has nothing to do with how I feel about a man's height. It's about how I don't like feeling big.
Right.
So it's
right.
like if I'm with someone who's shorter than me, I'm constantly, I can't help but flash forward to, well, I guess there's going to be no carrying me over the threshold because, right? So it's like
Right.
there is that part of it. So I think, like, attraction for me tends to come from someone who's built in a way that I feel like I wouldn't crush them. It's a pretty basic standard.
All right. So one of the things you mention is getting laid off. And you say this: getting laid off from my job the year after I moved to LA propelled me into working freelance, starting my own company, and meeting a number of important friends in the development of my career. So it sounds like getting laid off was a great thing for you.
It was. I mean, at the time, it was really scary. I had moved to LA for a job working at a voice software company. And it was literally like right at the end of month 11 when they laid me off. And I thought, like, oh, I paid all this money to move up here. But like at the same time, right at the end of that, I had still been freelancing I had a friend who worked at Sony Electronics, and I was freelancing doing graphic design and copywriting and stuff for them. And so I was working on this catalog, and it actually came at a great time to be laid off. Like, I wasn't happy about it, but I was like, well, at least now I can really spend time working on this catalog, which was going to pay me quite a bit of money. And I was right at the end of my first year lease in my apartment, and I was thinking, can I afford to stay? Should I move back to San Diego? I actually got offered a job during the course of the next few months with Sony, but they wanted me to move back to San Diego to take the job, although it was going to be half-time in San Diego and half-time in San Francisco. So I was like, well, what difference does it make to you where I live then?
Right.
So I didn't take the job, which was great. It ended up being great. Because I think if I'd moved back to San Diego, I would have felt like LA beat me in a way,
Right.
like that somehow the city was too much for me. And I had moved to LA specifically to break out of what I felt were a bunch of very confining aspects of my life in San Diego. It was after a breakup. It was like
Right.
I felt like I was a prisoner in my apartment because my boyfriend had only moved in for a few months, but then moved out, and I was left there with this apartment that I didn't want to stay in, but I'd renewed the lease. And I just felt like I was trapped in all of these things that I wish that I could change. So when I got offered this job, I was like, yeah. And also, it's not so far away that I wouldn't be able to see my parents all the time, because I've always been like, I want to be able to see my parents and be near them. And if anything should happen, I don't want to ever be so far away that that I can't like be there within a couple of hours. So I moved, and it was great. I mean, it really was, being in LA gave me the opportunity to experience culture and friends and all kinds of things that just like San Diego has a lot of, but it doesn't have it every night of the week. You know, LA has more going on every night of the week than San Diego does. So that was great. And I really did need to keep busy. And then it was like I suddenly was working full time freelancing for Sony, so much so that I ended up, you know, starting my own corporation just for tax purposes. And then I, you know, suddenly the Sony spigot dried up at one point, and I thought, uh-oh, am I going to have to move back to San Diego? That was like 2 or 3 years later. And then all of a sudden, a little freelance work came in, and then a guy asked me to, I met him on a Thursday, and I started working for him that night. And he was referred to me by another friend I knew from a previous consulting job. And I worked for him for 3.5 years. Freelance, but full-time, basically. Mm-hmm. And one of my clients there is my current boss. Like, I ended up going to work for him. So, like, so much of my... and then, like, that, and you know, wealth-wise, it's been... both of those jobs paid me very well, and I now own a home, and, like, there's a lot of things that I don't think... When I got laid off, that day that I got laid off, I wasn't envisioning how, well, this is going to lead to a lot more financial success.
Right.
You just don't think that way. And it's hard not to just focus on the fear of, like, am I ever going to get another job? I remember I had a date scheduled the night that I got laid off. It was one of the guys from salon.com. And I canceled on him, and he was a real dick about it. Like, he was just like, he thought that I was making an excuse. And I was like, dude, I just got laid off. Like, I'm going to drive down to San Diego and be with my family. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. He wasn't like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I really do think that it's very telling when you cancel a date with someone, how they react. It tells you a lot about empathy, maturity, like whether or not they actually are interested in how you're doing.
So well, dating is a lot of fear too. Mm-hmm. I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah,
and it's mixed with fear.
Well, I mean, yeah, and
sides.
if they think you're lying, then yeah, there's that issue too. Right. But it's like, well, I can only be responsible for how truthful I'm being.
Right.
And I think if a guy called me 3 different times and canceled on me, I might be like, okay, maybe you're not that into going out. Right. But if a guy like called me and said, oh my God, you know, I just lost my job, or someone in my family died or whatever, I can't imagine being like, whatever, dude, later. You know, like, I just can't. Right. I can't imagine that would be my response.
Right. Do you think you're better out of your comfort zone? Like, it sounds like there's some instances where once you were out of a comfort area and forced to make a decision, it worked out for the better. Like,
or it seems like the choices between a comfortable decision and
no,
a less
you're absolutely
decision.
right. Like, I would never choose the riskiest or most challenging option. I generally find myself not being able to not choose that. My personality is very much about sort of steady maintenance of predictable circumstances.
Right, okay.
And I really have had very little of that in my life, but it's where I'm most comfortable. I have so much anxiety about, like, being in new situations, talking to new people. I compensate for it by, you know, being friendly and gregarious and seeming like I, you know, enjoy people's company. But every time I go to a party, even if the party is for me, I feel unwelcome. Like, I always initially feel unwelcome until somebody makes me feel welcome. I've always described myself as like a friendship vampire. Like, you have to invite me in. I don't know how to insert myself into somebody's life. I have to be invited in.
Interesting. So you have safety in your in your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And do you think that's holding you back? Or
no, because I think there's so much entropy and chaos that I can't avoid, that I'm constantly being pushed into new choices, whether I want to or not. Like, I have the illusion that I'm in control of my circumstances, but God knows what's going to happen tomorrow, you know, whether it's professional or personal or whatever. Like, I know that if I don't really think that far into the future, because I know I'm not going to like what's there, because it's going to be hard. Not that it's going to all be bad, but It's going to be hard. It's like when I go running, if I'm running outdoors, I'm constantly negotiating with myself. The entire time, what's going on in my head is like, just to that sign, just keep running to that sign. You can walk after that sign. And then, like, just to the top of this hill, just, you know, like, you're constantly, like, giving yourself the option to quit. Like, you can just keep going until you quit here. And so, like, yeah, I mean, if I was really interested in being comfortable, I wouldn't run at all. But when I'm running, I realize the only way to motivate myself is to constantly give myself the choice to quit. And that's just a mental thing for me. It's like I can't. It's like a commitment thing. Like I'm not very good at doing a diet because for me, having that regimented, knowing exactly what I have to eat and whatever, like any kind of really, really set schedule to me is claustrophobic. It's like suffocating to feel like everything is going to be the same.
I totally get that. One thing that I found interesting was instead of changing the food portion, changing the size of the plate. And that was actually really helps is instead of at home, instead of putting food onto a large plate, put it onto a smaller plate. And
you've discovered restaurant genius level 101. Yes. Yeah, it's totally true. It feels like more. Well, I also think like I mean, like there's like I think it's like a Lean Cuisine commercial where there's a woman she's like a nurse in a hospital and she goes and takes her break and she microwaves this little thing of mac and cheese and it's on this like plate that must be 4 inches in diameter and it's just this like white mess of like macaroni and cheese, like there's nothing else on it, and she's just like, but I get to eat, I get to feed my body what I want, and she's like smiling and enjoying, and I just look at it and I was just like, that's not enough. Like I'm sitting there and like that's your meal, like literally nothing about that was appealing to me. I thought like no, I mean if that was all you were eating, I can't imagine you would be full.
What if they had put it on a nice plate?
Well, I mean I do think like if that's the actual portion, then maybe legally they have to show you that.
If it was a yogurt, you think like a yogurt is a snack or a nice little dessert, a cap on a meal. But you're right, mac and cheese, you think she gets 5 minutes for her 12-hour shift, and that's all she's eating is this little mac and cheese and bliss.
No, yeah, exactly. I want to see a sub sandwich that's like, like the length of a femur. And that would be appealing to me. And if you're telling me that's healthy, then great. I'm all for it.
Have you ever seen a medium or a clairvoyant?
I did see one.
Because that's looking into the future.
Yeah, and I didn't believe in any of it, and I felt like, I was with my friend who actually just had a birthday yesterday, my friend Julie. We were walking on Sunset, and there was like some little house that's like, a tarot reader and psychic and stuff. So she was like, we should go in. And I was like, this is not for me at all.
Right.
And we went in, and this woman wanted me to pay her I think she wanted me to pay her $100 for her to meditate on my behalf for like the next 5 days.
How generous.
Yeah, and she was like, I'll meditate for you. And she was like, and you can't eat any meat. Don't eat any meat for the next 5 days. And I was just like, what is this supposed to accomplish? And then she was like asking me, she was like, is there someone whose name begins with K? And I was just like, no. I was like, I guess my friend Kevin, but he wasn't like a boyfriend or anything. Like I didn't know. It was just like I sat there going like, I know someone whose name begins with K, but so like this trick, this sort of like the thing that makes you go, oh yeah, there is. Tell me more about him. It's like I just remember thinking it was all such chicanery that I was not into it at all. And I don't necessarily want to know the future because I think that there is. I really don't believe that we have control. So sort of, I feel like so much of my outlook changed in the 2000 election because that whole Gore versus Bush, like I just remember feeling that it created this wedge between me and my family because my dad and my mom and my older sister are Republicans. My younger sister and I are both very liberal. And it was all of a sudden, I felt so cheated by that election. I felt like our future had been irreparably changed by a series of unfair circumstances. And there were literally people in my social circle in my family that I could no longer talk to. Like, we just couldn't talk about it.
Alan and I talk about this often, about the conversation.
Yeah, but he's a fucking Republican, so. I know that about him.
Right. But the idea that we've lost the ability to debate on these things.
Well, because nobody's interested in having anything revealed to them. They believe they know and are entrenched. And so you're not, and the thing is, like, it actually, like, we've stopped respecting each other who aren't like, we've stopped accepting anyone who doesn't share our beliefs. Like, if someone says to you, if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter and someone says they support Bernie, you're like, high five, bro. You totally feel like we're buds, regardless of what that person's story is. Right. But then if you find out that someone's not supporting the person that you support, all of a sudden you go, what's that person's problem? Why are they so stupid? Why are they like, you just immediately distance yourself from them and you don't want to hear it. Like, I know not to listen to what my mom tells me about Donald Trump.
Right.
I know not to listen to that. I don't get mad at her, but I realize there's just no point. So the dialogue is useless, which I find to be very frustrating. It's very frustrating to not be able to talk about ideas with people anymore.
Thank you, Mary, so much for being here.
Of course, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Alan. All right. See you next time.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you to my producer, Alan Ing, and this week's guest, Mary Forrest. You can find Mary on Twitter at Mary Forrest. That's MaryForrest. And on Instagram at Mary Like a Fox. Our sound engineer is Stephen Ray Morris. You can contact him at StephenRayMorris.com. Music by My Monthly Date. You can find them at Facebook.com/MyMonthlyDate. Subscribe to 5 Things That Changed Your Life on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. And go ahead and leave us a nice review if you'd like. You can follow us online at 5thingspodcast.com or on Facebook at facebook.com/5thingspodcast, that's FIVE, or on Twitter at 5thingspod, that's FIVEPOD. For 5 Things That Changed Your Life, I'm Lauren Kling.